Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to speak to you, and I want to thank for the introduction. If I use some terminology that is not familiar to you, because I come from a culture of the military and security, don't hesitate, raise your hand, and I clear myself. Now, the idea is, of course, to make you more knowledgeable about what's going on today in the Middle East, concerning terror, but concerning also other sides that might be a threat also to your country, although it looks far away from India. The Middle East have a lot of influence about your commerce, about your economy, and also about the coming events and developments in what we call terror and what we call jihadistic Islam or Islamists. I want to be very clear. I am not going to speak about the majority of Muslims in the world. The majority of the Muslims in the world, if we have 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, most of them, by the way, not in the Middle East, and most of them don't speak or read Arabic. Most of them live in your area, which is Southeast Asia. Indonesia is the biggest Islamic country, not Egypt, and Malaysia, and even at your country, you have a very big minority of Muslims that are quiet, peaceful, good people that don't want to take part not in terror and not in problems. The problem is that in the Middle East, we have a different situation, and we are now on the rise, very rapid rise of Islamists, and what I call Islamists is Islamic Jihad. So I want to be very careful, and you to understand. I'm speaking mainly on the Middle East, what you call here Western Asia, okay? And I will try to give you some idea about what's going on today concerning the less or more Islamist, extremist factions that are active now in the Middle East, and how it's combined with what we call, by mistake, I repeat, by mistake, the Arab Spring. And I will argue that the only spring that somebody has is the spring of the Islamists and the jihadists. In the Middle East, if at all, it's not a spring. And if we talk about the regular Arab citizen, and as you know, Israel have 18% of its population is Muslims, and I can tell you that 99.5% of them are peace-loving and quiet populations that don't take part in any problems and suffer like us from terror, including missiles and including suicide bombers and so on. I can tell you that the problem is mainly the Middle East as a source of concern also to your country, but also to the rest of the world. Now, maybe I will start with saying, if we look at the map, that until the Arab so-called spring, which I called the most very cold winter, started, we had two competitors, or two competitions in the Middle East that actually was on hidden war and overt war. One was what the Jordanian king calls the Shia Arch. Not all of them are Shia, but Shias are running it, and it is made of the main states that is the locomotive, Iran, by arming this axis, by financing this axis, and by giving its ideology. Then the very big Shia minority in the south of Iraq that Iran is taking over and more. From there, so it goes from here to here, from here to Syria, that the majority are Sunnah, but many of them Muslim brothers, but the rulers are Alawites, and Alawites, to your knowledge, according to the Sunnah preachers, I'm talking about the Sunnah extremist preachers, the Islamists, are worse than Jews and Christians. Worse than Jews and Christians, they are doing rida, mortad, as they say, meaning they have been to the right Islam, taken it, twisted it, added to it some elements that are Christian elements, or even, God save us, Indian elements, and other, and this is extorted Islam, that the only thing that can be done to someone who made it is to make him short in the head, okay? Now from there, so it starts here, go to Syria, down. Now the arch start to go down. The base that Hezbollah have built in Lebanon, on first base on the shore of the Mediterranean, and this is Hezbollah, an organization that is equipped today with 45,000 rockets and missiles that threaten Israel, and not only Israel. And the last base that succeeded to build, not with Shia like Hezbollah, but with Sunnah, and it's a tactical alliance, is the state of the Hamas in Gaza Strip, down to Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is here, somewhere here, very close to the Egyptian border. This is the state of Hamastan, the state of the Hamas, that through elections and later through very bloody revolution against the Fatah, Abu Mazen, and the Palestinian authorities that sits here in the West Bank, simply by killing, shooting, and so on, succeeded to take over the Gaza Strip, and actually are connected today to Iran by financing and by upgrading their weapons, and they upgrade the weapons to a stability, to a situation, or to abilities in which they can today bomb all our big cities, including Tel Aviv. They have not got yet to Tel Aviv, but they have come to my home, to visit my home through missiles in Ashdod, somewhere here. I live here. And they threaten the stability of the whole Israeli public that lives near Tel Aviv, south of Tel Aviv, Beersheba, and all the cities in the south of Israel, while Hezbollah can threaten even Eilat here, our southern port, by missiles that can come, and they got it from Syria. So this is the axis of what we call the axis of evil, but they call it the axis of an idea, and the idea is the axis of mukawama. Mukawama means resistance. The jihad is a way, and the idea is to equip all these systems with weapons that can threaten and to take guerrilla organizations and to give them abilities of regular armies. Meaning to have missiles, for example, that can be shot from the shore of Lebanon and bring down and sink. They try, they're very close to success, our best missile boats by a surprise. Or bomb our airport, main airport. Just imagine that Mumbai airport will be under constant attack daily of missiles that fall on your aerodrome that takes off to, I don't know, to America or to Japan. No pilot from any foreign company will be ready to land here, okay? So it's guerrilla organizations that have ability, potentially, to threaten strategic areas in Israel. In front of them, and I'm not yet coming to touch the Arab Spring, before the Arab Spring, there was an axis of the pro-Western countries, plus, minus, not everybody so close. When I say pro-Western, meaning close to Britain, Europe, European superpowers, and United States. In the front, we had the biggest country, which was Egypt, with Mubarak as a president, that has the biggest army, and also a very big population, not in Indian, not in the Indian eyes maybe, because they're only 80 million, but so here it's a minority, okay, but that's a very big one. And Saudi Arabia that had a lot of money in petrol, plus all the Gulf states, okay, from Kuwait to Bahrain to United Arab Emirates, Oman, Yemen, at least the leadership, and the states that lie here, what we call Maghreb, which is Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and so on. In the middle, we have Israel and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. This is the West Bank, this small white thing that you see here in the middle of Israel between Jordan, and of course Jordan is part of this axis. Was not real united axis, but it had under the surface a lot of cooperation. Israel actually had cooperation, and I won't mention here because of security, but with most of those Arab states. I won't specify which channels. Most of them are low-profile channels. A new actor that started to enter on the last couple of years is Turkey, that its government became more and more Islamic. They were elected on Islamic base, the AKP. And Erdogan started some years ago to play two things. First of all, to show himself as a leader of the Sunnah Islam in the Middle East, and if he can, even far from this, towards east and west, or north, and second, even in the area of the old Russia, or USSR, and the second thing, of course, is Turkey, that was a strategic ally of Israel until the Islamic Party came to office. They want, first of all, to play the role of the defenders of the Sunnah. They defend the Sunnah, and they had also declared a policy of no conflicts with their neighbors that sit on their borders, meaning not with Syria, not with Iraq, not with Iran, not with all these neighbors on this side. That was the idea of Turkey until the Arab Spring. Now, that was the situation until the Arab Spring started. And it started in Tunisia, by the way, very surprising place. Why surprising place? Because Tunisia was the most open country. The less oppressed public of all Arab world was in Tunisia. So I don't really have a good example, a good explanation why it happened. But this was the situation in Tunisia here. It started here, and it started to roll when Ben Ali ran out of his country, and it came to elections. What is the result? Everybody said to us, those who visited Tunisia and had relations, you know, Tunisia, no way that it will become much, much more Islamic, because in Tunisia, the Islam was always marginal, because the regime there kept always, for example, the rights of women very open. Women are the most free women in the Arab world were in Tunisia. Okay? They were, I think, above 50% of the manpower that was working. Not a regular situation in Egypt or in Jordan. High-ranking offices for women. And not only this, it was open for tourism. It was open for, let's say, joint bathing in the sea. Men and women could go together to cinema and things like this. It was not Saudi Arabia. Okay? It was not Somalia or other places. So everybody said, Islamic movement won't get anything. What we saw is that the leaders of the Muslim Brothers, which is the biggest element of Islam, the biggest party, or the biggest, it's not party, it's a movement, in Islam in the whole Middle East, and if you ask me in the world, I think that even Ashkar al-Taiba, which you know better than me, are very close in their ideology to Islam, to Muslim Brothers, and more than this. I can tell you that Ashkar al-Taiba, one of the founders of the ideology of Ashkar al-Taiba, and later the founders of Jamaat al-Dawah at your country, was a Muslim brother and Palestinian. And he came from very near my house. Here, I lived here before in Nazareth. He came from the city in the north of the West Bank, from Jenin. His name was Dr. Abdullah Azam. And he was one of the three founders of Jamaat al-Dawah at your country. So again, you start to see how things come together, the relations, ideological relations, and the main source of ideology, even for things at your area here, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so on, actually started to come from here. Also, not only. Now, what happened in the elections in Tunisia is that we had the first elections for the group that will make the covenant or the constitution of Tunisia. The results, surprise, surprise, were 41% for the Muslim Brotherhood. All the rest of them, few percent. Vast majority for the Muslim Brotherhood. Why? Because the Muslim Brotherhood have the ability and the knowledge to act even if they are deported under the surface to keep their forces. And they are very clever, very sophisticated, they know how to run it. And that was a shock for everybody, not for us. We knew it. We knew it because we know, because we have a very long experience with Muslim Brothers in the territories of the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, and also in the neighboring countries. And we share a lot of knowledge with the neighboring, it's not a secret, neighboring intelligence systems of Egypt and neighboring intelligence of Jordan. The head of the Egyptian intelligence until the Arab Spring used to come to Israel, General Suleiman, almost every month, if you ask me. Now, look at the second development in Egypt. In Egypt, the Muslim Brothers also were behind. They were not the initiators of the riots, but since it started, they were behind it. They gave order to their people, they gave order to the people not to be in the front, but in the back, not to use their slogans in the front, but they were behind it. And suddenly, when Mubarak was thrown out of his chair, you saw that the regime of Tantawi, the general whom Mubarak was actually his mentor, and all the generals that were behind him, started to make a so-called tactical alliance with the Muslim Brothers. And the Muslim Brothers, actually, I say tactical because they can go to clash in the future. But for the time being, Muslim Brothers are on the rise in Egypt. And when you ask Egyptian journalists, who are very deep-rooted in the politics in Egypt, how much the Muslim Brothers will get, they tell you they will be the biggest party and they will have around 40%, between 37 to 40%, to that extent that they think about not to win too much, because they prefer that someone else will be in the front after the elections. Some of them suggest, let's not win too much, okay, to that extent. They are the only organized party. The problem with this is that if they will be in the front, you already see voices in Egypt that call to abolish the peace agreement with Israel. That will be the first thing to do, an agreement that keep and stabilize the peace in the Middle East, no doubt, at least in the borders between us and them here. The second problem of Egypt is that because the Egyptian police now is in a very big problem. They lost control. I won't enter why. I don't have the time to this. And also the other forces that deal with interior stability, the Sinai Peninsula have turned to be a new area of global jihad, or what we call glocal jihad, global and local together. Meaning it's not exactly a body that gets its instruction from Al-Qaeda somewhere in Afghanistan, Pakistan, but it gets the ideas of them, and they declared on the Sinai Peninsula, this is Sinai Peninsula here, as a free, liberated Islamic Emirate. They succeeded until now, when I talk about thousands of Bedouins and Egyptian citizens who are Islamist jihadists, to stop, almost to stop totally, not totally, but almost totally, the supply of gas from Egypt. They earn a lot of it, to Jordan and Israel. They have bombed it more than 6 times, and in the last 200 days, we got no more than 20 days of gas. And it's very important for us because it's very low price gas, and it's a very big source for Egypt, for its budget. And Egypt now is in a very big crisis economically, not only Italy. Now, the second thing, they are now controlling all the roads in Sinai, and they stopped the tourism to Sinai, not only Israeli, also European tourism. No tourists to Sinai, no tourists to Egypt. because Egypt today is in a chaos of strikes, and even Christians don't feel anymore. I'm talking about Egyptian Christians, Copts. You know, you heard about the Copts. They are 10% of the population in Egypt. They feel a big fear now, and I want to remind you that in one Friday, some weeks ago, I think a month ago, there was a very big clash in Cairo. They came to riot in order to enable them. They wanted only one thing, to enable them to build churches without problems. The government until then prohibited them from building churches, even from rebuilding or cleaning or rebuilding churches. That was the main demand. The result was 25 people killed within 20 minutes, 300 injured. And because of the clashes with security forces. So that's, in such situation, no Christian tourists from Russia or from Italy will come to visit Cairo. I'm sad about this. I'm not enjoying this. I mean, for us, it's also a very bad situation, because also Israelis not there now to go to the Sinai, and many Israelis went here to the Sinai Peninsula to make tourism, and Egypt made a lot of money on this. But mainly the tourism that came to the pyramids, to Cairo, all of this is totally paralyzed. This is one of the main economical sources for Egyptian economy. And the problem of Egypt is that the government have to feed 80 million mouths or citizens, and everything is falling apart. The investment or the money that they succeed to take from the Suez Canal also is a drop, around 15 to 20%, because there are also riots and strikes around the Suez Canal ports. You can ask me, Shalom, what has to do with India? It has to do a lot, because this stability along this area where the Suez Canal is here, and here, 20 kilometers from the Suez Canal, you have a new global emirate, jihad, a new emirate of jihad, with thousands of rifles and rockets and shore-to-sea missiles. That means, in the future, this stability to the shipping from your country and your export-import to Europe and all the areas near Europe. And it's not only for you, also for us. This is one of the reasons that Israel only lately have opened here in Eilat a new base, renewed its base in Eilat of the Israeli Navy with 2 missile boats, because we expect troubles, first of all along the shore here, but also inside and all this navigation area here. To mention another spring, so-called spring, let's take Yemen. In Yemen, what is called spring, actually, you see a lot of riot of civilians. This is true. But it's a war of everybody against everybody. Each faction that makes strikes in the streets that are called peaceful has, side by side with it, has a militia. And those militias are fighting each other. Iran, of course, is intervening here by helping the pro-Shia tribes here in the north, and the main system that helps them is the Revolutionary Guard with weapons and money. And you ask me, okay, Shalom, what it has to do with India? Again, the main shipping area is for you to these areas of Europe, a lot of export, is the Bab el-Mandab Straits. Now, you can come and say, okay, we already have a problem there with the pirates. It's true, with the pirates we have a problem, but the pirates and piratic activity here is mainly here and here in Somalia, and this area too, but this is not as dangerous as systems of tribes which is equipped by the Revolutionary Guard of Iran with missiles. That's upgrading of the abilities of the piracy. I won't be surprised if they will join and bring inside also pirates from Somalia and other places. I'm talking about the Iranian peace-loving Revolutionary Guard. Go and look, for example, at Jordan. In Jordan, there is riots of Muslim brothers every Friday. Huge. Jordan was the symbol of stability to Arab states. Much more stable and order, law and order. If there was a symbol of law and order for Arab states, we know it because we visited Jordan. We still visit, but much less. immediately understand why. Because Jordan, today you have riots against the king and against the government. For the last couple of months, it turns more and more daring. Before they called slogans against the corruption, now they call the king to give a lot of his abilities to rule, and they called to fire the government. The result was that the king had, at the end of the day, to fire the government and to fire the head of the intelligence as part, and to nominate as part of concessions to the Muslim Brotherhood. And the problem is that we see much more and more violent riots against the police. For example, I can show you an example of one protest that even was made of Salafist jihadists. I don't know if someone of you know what Salafi are here. Salafiyya Jihadiyya is very equal to the Wahhabist that you see from Saudi Arabia, but a little bit different. They believe that we have to go and live in the way that the Prophet Muhammad lived, meaning dressing like the days of Muhammad, using the tools of the days of Muhammad, and so on. Every new thing is bad, especially if it comes from the West. And they were writing the first Friday with 40, second Friday 400, third Friday 4,000. And when the police did nothing, because they were afraid this was the order of the king to try and absorb it, to be merciful, they simply took out knives and stabbed in the stomach 70 Jordanian policemen. In 20 minutes, they were in hospital. Such a thing in Jordan is something terrible. It's a sin, and I give you only small things that I have the feeling from my visit in India and talking to your to different bodies here, doesn't come here to the press. You have your own problems with Ashkar Taiba, with Pakistan and others, so I understand it. But I want you to understand that even here, the atmosphere in Jordan become more and more Islamist, more and more daring. First of all, against the regimes that are seen as pro-Western. Not connected to the whole Arab Spring, but still a problem is the chaos in Iraq. I mean, there is a chaos, riots and mainly operations of insurgents, Kurds against Shias, Shias against Sunnis. Every day you can see something like 30 people killed. You can see it in the Arab press. I screen every morning the Arab press and look at it, and the TV and so on. It's very obvious. Now, sir, you can take the picture because the map is here. Okay. Thank you. Oh, it's okay. So, chaos in Iraq, chaos in Yemen, chaos in Jordan, or semi-chaos in Jordan, but it might lead to chaos. All of them with Islamic aroma. Problems in Egypt, rise of Islamic Brothers. Tunisia, rise of Islamic Brothers by elections. Libya, that was assisted by the West with its bombings. Without the bombing of the West, they couldn't get any progress in finishing the Gaddafi regime. Now the situation is that you have 40 different groups, all of them armed. Some of the commanders were before in Guantanamo or in investigation for being part of Al-Qaeda, and some of them are no doubt Islamists. The first declaration that the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister for the time being until elections, have made after the declaration of liberation, after they killed Gaddafi in a very democratic and judicial way, as some of you, I guess, have seen. Allow me to be a little bit cynic, because they say that the Arab Spring brings democracy, okay? Now, after that, he went to the podium, and the first message that he had to the Arab peoples and to his people, the Libyan people, was, we are going to come back to the real Sharia. And the first thing to do is to abolish the instruction of Gaddafi that husbands are not allowed to have 4 women. From now on, every man can have 4 women. No doubt liberation for the women in Libya. And the same thing was when the Tunisian guy went to the podium after the elections. He said, well, we try to keep everything as it was, but we will stick to the Sharia. Those of you who think that Sharia can go with democracy will please get up. And as I see, nobody got up. Now, if you ask me, those problems are the main problems of Israel today, but also yours, because the atmosphere is going to be more Islamic in the future, in the Middle East. And that means immediately, and here I come back to your troubles, as I talked to the Suez Canal or to the Straits of Bab el-Mandab, that are going to be a trouble. It means that the Middle East will be more tolerant toward one of your best friends, Pakistan. And more than this, more tolerant to collection of money and training to Ashkar Taiba. Because today, their sister party of Ashkar Taiba in the Middle East, the Muslim Brothers, are going to be in the rule, either by hidden from behind or on the top. If we mention Pakistan, for the Israeli public, generally I can say that Pakistan is not an area that you hear a lot in the Israeli press in the last couple of years. But in the last couple of weeks, suddenly the Israeli public start to hear about it. We in the intelligence know much more, of course, about it for a long time. For given reasons, not everything went out. I'll give you some points of common concern, India and Israel. For example, according to all the papers that some intelligence systems have, A.Q. Han and Pakistan. And I don't think that he did it by his own decision, if you ask. Such a thing, to build a full complex, it's true that the other one was held by South Korea and maybe Iranian money. Here, A.Q. Han with Pakistan. So Pakistan, with proliferation of atomic weapons, for us, Israelis, is very serious. Why? Because Syria is a proxy of Iran, and Iran declares almost every week. Ahmadinejad declares that his task and his Iran task or goal is to smash Israel, to take it out of the map. And this is a state that is member in the United Nations, like us. And this is the only case in which one state of UN called to simply to destroy another state totally and take it out of the map, out of existence. If you want another story, we now hear from the report of the IAEA that for the first time, not through reports from the American intelligence or the Israeli intelligence that are leaked out, but this is the world say this, meaning the united system of the world to say what is the situation in research of atomic energy plants in the world, and they say it from Vienna, and they say that Iran is doing a military project. They don't specify exactly in what phase they are. No doubt they have done at least some years of research about it. That means that the Iranians are also the biggest liar to the IAEA, because they lied, they keep on lying. But now they cannot say it's America, or it's Israel, or it's Britain, or France. Now it's the world telling it. Inside it, you suddenly see materials and stories about the help of a person whose Israeli never met before, A.Q. Han, who supplies the detonators for this. And this is now in the UN report, okay? If you go to Libya, we come closer and closer now to the documents of the archives of Gaddafi, not only to his secret accounts and billions of dollars. We can get more and more papers. And again, one of the main assistants for the nuclear system of Gaddafi that he gave up at the end under pressure, A.Q. Han in Pakistan. We just heard, after our Minister of Defense visited in London, that Saudi Arabia, okay, that Saudi Arabia have a secret, and that came from journalists. I guess the leak came from London, maybe MI6, maybe the Foreign Ministry of England, or maybe Israeli sources that were sitting with them, that Saudi Arabia is planning to buy bombs, already made bombs from Pakistan. In what conditions? If Iran will get a bomb, or will get a real nuclear that can operate. We don't know what time it will be. There is debate about this. It might be 2 years from now, 2.5 years from now, maybe earlier, maybe they hide something, we don't know, but it's very close. Now, if Saudi Arabia will have one, no doubt that Egypt will be the first to build or to take one, and then maybe Turkey that want to be a superpower in the Middle East. And the whole Middle East will be nuclearized by whom? By initiative of Pakistan. So for the Israeli public, suddenly Pakistan pops up as a very big problem, especially on the matters of threats, which for us are existential threats. And we believe that Iran means when they say that they are going to take Israel out of the map. You can ask me how come, because the Iranian is a very developed people. I'm telling you, the Iranians are very good people. If you talk about the people, very educated, old culture, but they have a stinking leadership and crazy leadership. That's a problem. Poor people, that its fate is to have a rule of mullahs with very extreme ideas, not only about Israel, by the way, okay? And that's why you see now more and more clash between the Shia elements in the Middle East and the Sunni elements, okay? That's the second line. But again, the source of this, or the beginning, starts with Pakistan selling or proliferating weapons in the Middle East, and that is very annoying for us. We also heard that from high-ranking bodies close to the Pakistanis, that Pakistan is planning to triple their arsenal of weapons in the next 3, 4, 5 years. And I asked myself why Pakistan must do this. Allow me to guess that part of it will go in order to sell it. Pakistan, as you know, is in a brilliant situation if we talk about economy, okay, and they need the money. And so it makes sense. But that's the only assumption. So we talked about Pakistan as a neutral problem for you and us. We talked about the threat on the Bab el-Mandab and the Suez Canal. I want to say some words about Libya, because Libya is also a threat from other aspects, and this is the aspect of proliferation of weapons for terror. Libya, Gaddafi have bought a lot of weapons for personal use, meaning anti-aircraft missiles that can be carried by people, not the big one, SA-7. He bought a lot of anti-tank missiles. I'm talking about thousands of thousands. All of them were, after the revolution, became neglected. Because Libya is a total chaos. Everybody is against everybody. We have 40 different militias armed. None of them is ready to give up the weapons. And one of the problems, first of all, is to collect the weapons from the street, because they start to shoot at each other. Very big string, as you know, okay? In democracy. Our fat ones have made this slogan when they talked about the democracy inside the PLO. If someone knows Arabic here, Demokratiyat al-Banadik, the democracy of the rifles. This is the democracy of the rifles. And that's a problem. So how to control it? The Americans have earmarked more than $40 million in order to have special groups that will go to these arsenals and check what is missing and to try to catch everything and to concentrate it in one place and try to prevent the leak of all this or overspilling of this. But it can overspill itself. We already have in Gaza Strip missiles that came from Libya. One of them fell just near my house. It fell on a synagogue, made a hole in the roof, but did not explode. And we guess that it's Libyan because from Libya, most of them are very old. So generally, if I have to conclude what I said here, we have a rise of the Muslim Brothers and Islamist movements. The Middle East became very unstable, and it will be more unstable because the process of elections now will take, for example, in Egypt, at least a year, if not a year and a half. In Tunisia also, we don't know who is going to rule Egypt in the future, because we might see also some moves from the ruling junta that will try to prevent the elections. That, by the way, they are accused for this, not by me, they are accused by the Muslim Brothers on this and by other factions. The problem is that democracy is not only elections. Democracy is a full concept, and it's most important is what happened after the elections. If parties are ready to give up their weapons after liberation and go to the well-known slogan about the weapons of one hand holds the weapons, not every hand holds the weapons in the street. Because if every party have a militia, that is going to be, no doubt, a bad end at the end of the story, okay? And adding to this the story in Syria, Mark, can I get the number, give me number 4, please. Yeah. If we go to the story in Syria, that's how it's described by the Arab press, not by me. Okay, those of you who, this is, by the way, Saudi Arabian, but also the Palestinian press described like this. It's written here, Mustamarin fil Islah. Mustamarin fil Islah, meaning we go on in the reforms. Okay, the reforms that Assad promised to his people, but actually he is doing killing every day of women, children, elders. I told you 40 per day, plus minus. If you talk about Fridays, regular day, only 10, only. Okay, only 10, with hundreds of killing. And that's how the Arab world is describing Syria. That brings, of course, Hamas, that sits in Syria, in Damascus, to try and run out of to disconnect itself from Syria, because how can you be under the umbrella of an Alawite that kills Sunnah, and Hamas is Sunnah, more than this, not only Sunnah, he kills Sunnah, including Palestinian refugees who sit in refugee camps in Syria. Only some weeks ago, the Syrian Navy bombarded the refugee camps of Latakia on the shore of the Mediterranean. And if this is a picture, Hamas need a place, and they will try to find it in Egypt, because the Muslim Brothers are now on the rise, or in Jordan, where the Muslim Brothers are on the rise. For us, it's a very bad thing. But if they will be there, they will have much more help from the Muslim Brotherhood, so it's very bad news for Israel. Hamas is a potential element, and Muslim Brothers, I repeat it time and again, to help very jihadistic, Islamistic elements in your areas. And you will see, I think, much more visits to Pakistan, much more visits of, some of them may be secret, of Ashkar Taiba delegation and others to such states that will turn to be Islamic. Maybe not immediately, but after a while. I'm sorry that I described here a very gloomy picture of what we would like to be real in spring. We really want a real democracy for the Middle East. But as things go on, and as it looks in Yemen, as it looks in Libya, it looks more and more as a war of civilians. In Syria, no doubt, it's rolling down to a civil war. I can tell you that we hear from officers, that we meet Lebanese officers, high-ranking officers, that the price of weapons that are now in Lebanon, in Beirut, mainly of light weapons, like Kalashnikov AK, like pistols, like hand grenades, RPG, rockets, and so on, have gone up 100%, 150% up. And the reason is that now, instead of weapons coming from Syria to Lebanon, for years, the direction is the opposite. From Lebanon to Syria, each community, and Syria, you know, is a community of minorities, is people made of many, Druze on the Jabal Druze, on the Druze mountain, Kurds on the east, far east north, Alawites, I just described to you, that are afraid that they will be massacred for what they did until now, to say. Christians and so on, all of this might bring a very bad situation also to Syria. Thank you for listening. And I think now it's open for questions according to what you said. Thank you.